The air on Fort Sheridan's main parade ground was still and heavy with the promise of afternoon heat. 1,000 soldiers stood in rigid formation, their multicam uniforms a pixelated sea of green and tan under the unforgiving Georgia sun. Sweat traced invisible lines down temples, but no one moved. Not a twitch, not a glance. The event was a routine change of command ceremony, an exercise in perfected tedium, but with a visiting four-star general in attendance, the pressure for absolute perfection was immense. Command Sergeant Major Evans stalked the lines like a predator, his eyes missing nothing. His gaze was a physical weight, pressing down on the soldiers, searching for the slightest imperfection, a loose thread, a scuffed boot, a hint of unease. He was a man carved from granite and regulations, and he believed discipline was forged in these moments of agonizing stillness. Specialist Anna Reed stood in the third rank of Charlie Company, a logistics and supply platoon. She was, by all accounts, unremarkable. Her file listed her as a 92A, an automated logistical specialist. She was a clerk, a number cruncher, a person who ensured bolts and bandages got to where they needed to be. In a world of warriors, she was administrative support. She was quiet, kept to herself, and performed her duties with a flat, unwavering competence that drew no attention, good or bad. She was functionally invisible, and she preferred it that way. The command came down the line, a ripple of shouted orders. Present, ARMS. 1,000 rifles snapped up in unison, a single, sharp crack of metal and polymer that echoed across the field. Evans's eyes narrowed, scanning. He saw a flicker of movement in the fifth rank, a slight wobble from a young private, and he made a mental note. His gaze continued its sweep, and then it stopped. It stopped on Specialist Reed. There was something different about her. It wasn't just that her movements were precise. They were economical, fluid, imbued with a certainty that was startling. While others fought to hold their M4 carbine steady, hers seemed to be a natural extension of her body. The rifle was perfectly balanced, her posture immaculate, her gaze fixed forward, utterly impassive. She was a statue of military perfection. The visiting general, General Morrison, a man who had seen 3 decades of war zones, was walking the line alongside Evans. He, too, noticed her. He paused, his own inspection slowing to a halt directly in front of the unassuming specialist. Evans stiffened. A general stopping for a specialist was unheard of unless there was a grievous error. But there was no error. Morrison's eyes weren't on her uniform or her weapon's cleanliness. They were on her hands, her stance, the subtle tension in her frame that spoke not of nervousness, but of profound readiness. He saw a coiled spring where everyone else saw a simple soldier. He looked at her name tag. Reed. He said nothing more. He simply held his gaze for a second longer than was comfortable, a silent, penetrating inquiry, before giving a nearly imperceptible nod. He then continued down the line. Evans was baffled and vaguely irritated. The moment passed, but it left a ripple. The soldiers on either side of Reed felt the shift, the sudden, unwelcome spotlight. For the rest of the ceremony, Evans found his eyes drawn back to the quiet logistics specialist. He saw nothing else out of the ordinary. She was just a soldier, standing in a line. He dismissed it. She was probably just one of those high-strung types who obsessed over drill and ceremony, useless in any real-world scenario. He had seen her type before. Good for parades, useless for a fight. The ceremony concluded, the formations were dismissed, and the sea of soldiers broke apart, their collective tension dissolving into the humid air. Specialist Reed melted back into the background, just another face in the crowd heading back to the barracks, her brief moment in the sun already forgotten by nearly everyone. But not by everyone. The general's aide had made a note. And Command Sergeant Major Evans, a man who prided himself on knowing every soldier in his command, now had a name that stuck in his mind for all the wrong reasons: Reed. It was an anomaly, an unanswered question, and Evans did not like unanswered questions. He resolved to pull her file, to understand the source of the general's unusual interest. For now, however, it was back to the routine. The day was ending like any other. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns and concrete buildings of the base. It was a day of absolute, predictable normalcy. And then the world went dark. The first sign was the hum. A low, pervasive electronic drone that seemed to seep from the very walls of the buildings. Then, the lights across Fort Sheridan flickered once, twice, and died. A collective groan went up from 1,000 throats as primary power failed. Seconds later, the emergency generators were supposed to kick in. They didn't. A profound, unnatural silence fell over the base, broken only by the distant, confused shouts of soldiers caught in the sudden blackness. In the base's nerve center, the Tactical Operations Center, or TOC, the silence was replaced by a rising panic. Every screen, every monitor, every communication link went dead simultaneously. It wasn't a power outage, it was a decapitation. The entire digital nervous system of a major military installation had been severed in a single, surgical strike. Command Sergeant Major Evans was in his office reviewing after-action reports from the ceremony when his world dissolved into black. His reaction was instantaneous, honed by years of instinct. He didn't question. He acted. "Get me a runner. Find the TOC commander. I want status reports now." He roared into the darkness, his voice a physical force. His aide scrambled, using the light from his phone to navigate the suddenly unfamiliar office. The base-wide backup comms, hardened landlines that were supposed to be impervious to electronic warfare, were also dead. It was impossible. It was like the laws of physics had been suspended. Specialist Anna Reed was in her barracks room, cleaning her rifle from the drill. She didn't need light for the task. Her hands knew every pin, every spring, every surface of the weapon by heart. When the power cut out, she didn't flinch. She simply continued her work in the dark, her movements smooth and uninterrupted. But she was listening. The quality of the silence was wrong. It wasn't the quiet of a simple power failure. It was the dead, absolute silence of a system that had been killed. She felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It was the chilling premonition of a carefully constructed reality beginning to fracture. Outside, the chaos mounted. Without communications, command and control evaporated. Junior officers and NCOs were left to their own devices, trying to maintain order and muster their troops according to contingency plans that all relied on a functioning communication network. Evans, navigating by flashlight, made it to the TOC. The scene was one of controlled desperation. The cyber warfare team, the base's elite digital guardians, were working frantically on inert terminals. They were pilots without planes. "Report," Evans bellowed, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter. A young captain, the senior officer on duty, turned to him, his face pale in the glow of a battery-powered lantern. "We're blind, Sergeant Major. Completely blind. It's not an equipment failure. It's an attack. A sophisticated one. They bypassed every firewall, every countermeasure. It's like they had the keys to the kingdom. Everything is offline. Communications, surveillance, the perimeter defense grid, all of it." Evans felt a surge of cold fury. This wasn't a drill. This was a siege. He was the senior enlisted man on a base that was deaf, dumb, and blind, a fortress with its gates wide open. His mind raced through protocols, through checklists, but they were all useless. Every plan started with one basic assumption: the ability to communicate. "Get the runners moving. I want a full physical lockdown. Every gate, every access point secured by manpower. Full battle rattle. Go." The captain nodded, barking orders to the runners who stood by, ready to ferry messages across the sprawling base like something out of the 18th century. As the soldiers scrambled, a single emergency monitor on the far wall, a display hardwired to the base's independent power grid controller, flickered to life. It didn't show a status report. It showed a clock. A simple, stark, digital countdown in glowing red numerals. It started at 60 minutes. And beneath the countdown, a single line of text appeared, a string of incomprehensible characters that seemed to crawl across the screen like a digital serpent. The cyber team stared at it, mesmerized and horrified. "What is that? A ransom note?" a technician muttered. "No," the captain said, his voice barely a whisper. "That's the virus. That's the payload. It's not just shutting us down. It's burrowing into something." Anna, having secured her weapon, made her way to her platoon's muster point. She moved through the darkened corridors with an unnatural ease, her senses heightened. She could smell the fear in the air, a mix of sweat and anxiety. She saw the disorganized clumps of soldiers, their uncertainty palpable. She saw the failure of a system that relied too heavily on technology that was now turned against it. She was just another soldier in the dark, following orders, but her mind was already working, analyzing, processing the scant information she had. The silence, the totality of the outage, the lack of secondary system activation. It all pointed to a single, terrifying conclusion. This was not a random attack. This was a targeted strike executed with an impossible level of access and precision. Someone, somewhere, had found a master key, and they were now inside the house. The red numbers on the emergency monitor bled into the tense atmosphere of the TOC, each descending second a hammer blow against their dwindling hopes. 59:00, 58:59. The implications of the countdown were terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a shutdown, it was a prelude. The virus was a guided missile aimed at the heart of the base, and the clock was its fuse. Command Sergeant Major Evans stared at the screen, his mind a whirlwind of inadequate responses. His entire career had been built on direct action, on meeting threats with overwhelming force. But how do you fight a shadow? How do you attack an enemy that exists only as malicious code on a screen? His authority, so absolute on the parade ground just hours before, felt hollow and useless. "What is it targeting?" he demanded, turning to the cyber warfare captain. The captain, a man named Davies, shook his head, sweat beading on his forehead. "We don't know, Sergeant Major. The code it's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's layered, polymorphic. Every time we try to analyze a segment, it changes. It's rewriting itself as it burrows. The system it's running on is a closed loop, tied to the base's industrial controls. It could be the power grid, the water reclamation plant, the armory's environmental controls, anything." The list of potential disasters was sickening. A power grid overload could start a chain of fires. A water failure would render the base uninhabitable in days. But the armory was the nightmare scenario. The environmental controls kept sensitive munitions stable. If those failed, the resulting detonation could wipe Fort Sheridan off the map. Runners continued to cycle in and out of the TOC, bringing grim news from across the base. The physical lockdown was proving porous. Automated gates, now free from central control, were failing in the open position. The perimeter sensors were dead. They were a walled city with all the doors unlocked and the watchmen blinded. The base was now a prison and a target. Outside the TOC, Specialist Anna Reed and the rest of Charlie Company were tasked with reinforcing a secondary gate. They moved in silence, a column of armed soldiers jogging through the encroaching darkness. The mood was grim. The absence of information was more terrifying than any direct threat. Rumors spread like wildfire. It was the Russians, the Chinese, a terrorist cell. But Anna wasn't listening to the rumors. She was observing. She saw the patterns of failure, the specific systems that were down. It was too clean. A brute force attack would have left digital wreckage, fried circuits, corrupted but accessible data. This was different. This was a surgical excision, a ghost in the machine that left no trace but the silence it created. They reached the gate, a heavy steel barrier that now hung slightly ajar, its magnetic locks dead. As her squad leader began organizing defensive positions, Anna's attention was drawn to a small, unassuming security substation nearby. Through its window, she could see a bank of monitors, all black except for one, which displayed the same terrifying countdown as the screen in the TOC. But from her angle, she could see something more. Below the main countdown, a smaller diagnostic line was flashing strings of code, the raw data of the virus's activity. The other soldiers ignored it, their focus on the physical threat beyond the gate. But Anna couldn't look away. Her eyes scanned the rapidly scrolling text. It was a chaotic mess of symbols, a digital storm. But in the heart of the storm, she saw it. A single string of code, a sequence of 7 alphanumeric characters that repeated at irregular intervals. It was a ghost from a past she had buried under years of mundane logistics reports. It was a signature, a digital fingerprint left by a specific programmer, a specter from a Black Ops unit that didn't officially exist. A program that had been created to build unbreakable systems, not to tear them down. Her blood ran cold. She knew the architect of their destruction. She knew his style, his methods, his arrogance. And she knew that he never built a lock without also designing a key. She had to tell someone. The chain of command was a sacred thing, but it was also a slow, bureaucratic beast. She approached her squad leader, a young sergeant named Miller. "Sergeant, I need to get a message to the TOC. It's about the code on that screen." Miller, stressed and focused on his perimeter, barely glanced at her. "What about it, specialist?" "It's a virus. We know that. Get back on the line." "No, Sergeant," Anna insisted, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through his agitation. "It's a specific kind. I recognize the signature. I know who wrote it." Miller stopped and stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. "You what? You're a 92A Reed. A clerk. What the hell would you know about cyber warfare?" "I know what I'm seeing," she repeated, her gaze unwavering. The intensity in her eyes, so out of place on her usually impassive face, gave him a moment's pause. But it was too absurd. The idea that a supply clerk could decipher what was stumping the base's top experts was ludicrous. "I don't have time for this, Reed. There are real threats out here. Get back to your position." "That's an order." Anna held his gaze for a moment longer, a silent battle of wills. She could see the wall of his disbelief, the rigid adherence to rank and specialty. He couldn't see past the patch on her sleeve. She gave a sharp nod. "Yes, Sergeant." She turned and walked back to her post, the dismissal stinging less than the precious seconds ticking away on the red clock. The system was failing, not just the digital one, but the human one, too. Her knowledge was useless if she couldn't get it to the right people. She looked back at the substation, then at the chaotic command structure around her. An order was an order, but some things transcended orders. She had to find another way. The fate of the base might depend on it. Anna watched Sergeant Miller bark orders, his attention wholly consumed by the physical defense of the gate. She understood his perspective. He was dealing with the tangible threat he was trained for. The ghost on the screen was an abstract problem, something for the experts in their air-conditioned rooms. But Anna knew the real danger wasn't a potential truck bomb at the gate. It was the digital cancer eating the base from the inside out. The countdown was now below 45 minutes. Time was a luxury she didn't have. Breaking the chain of command was a cardinal sin in the military, but the circumstances were unprecedented. She made a decision. She waited for a moment when the squad's attention was focused on a vehicle approaching the checkpoint. Then she slipped away from her position, melting into the shadows of the nearby buildings. She moved with a silent, practiced efficiency, staying low, using the darkness as a cloak. Her movements were not those of a logistics clerk. They were fluid, economical, and purposeful, the muscle memory of a different life taking over. Her target was the Sector 3 communications hub, a larger building that she knew had a direct, albeit currently dead, fiber optic link to the TOC. If she could get to a terminal there, she might be able to find a backdoor, a maintenance port, some forgotten pathway into the core network that the attacker might have overlooked. The building was dark and deserted. Emergency protocols meant all non-essential personnel were supposed to be at muster points or in hardened shelters. She found a locked side door. A quick, professional inspection revealed a simple electronic lock, now inert. A credit card and a moment of practiced leverage was all it took. The lock clicked open. She slid inside, closing the door silently behind her. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and dormant electronics. Using the faint red glow of the emergency exit signs, she navigated the labyrinth of cubicles and server racks. She found what she was looking for, a network administrator's station, more powerful than the standard terminals. She sat down, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She took a deep breath, pushing down the surge of adrenaline, and let a cold, focused calm settle over her. This was her world. Not the parade ground, not the supply depot. This dark room, this silent machine, this was her battlefield. The screen was black. She began a sequence of commands, tapping keys with a rapid, staccato rhythm. She was trying to force a cold boot into the system's BIOS, bypassing the corrupted operating system. It was a long shot. The attacker was thorough, but thoroughness and omniscience were two different things. He might have focused on the main OS and network protocols, ignoring the machine's fundamental firmware. For several minutes, nothing happened. The screen remained stubbornly black. She tried another approach, a different set of commands, one that exploited a known hardware-level vulnerability in that specific model of workstation. A flicker, a single cursor, a tiny green underscore, blinked to life in the top left corner of the screen. It was a whisper of a pulse in a dead body. She was in, not into the network, but into the machine itself. From here, she could work. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing lines of code, her mind fully immersed in the abstract world of logic and data. She was no longer Specialist Reed, the clerk. She was a surgeon, preparing to operate on a patient at the brink of death. While she worked, a frantic search was underway for the soldier who had abandoned her post. Sergeant Miller, having dealt with the vehicle, noticed her absence. Furious, he reported it to his platoon leader. In the current crisis, deserting a post was a grave offense. The report, passed up a makeshift chain of command via runners, eventually reached the TOC. Command Sergeant Major Evans, already buried under a mountain of catastrophic problems, received the news with a snarl. One of my soldiers walked off her post. At a time like this, get her name. An aide handed him a note. Specialist Anna Reed, Sergeant Major. The name hit him like a physical blow. The same specialist the general had noticed. The same soldier who, he now vaguely recalled from a glance at her file earlier, had a completely unremarkable, almost suspiciously blank service record. His initial irritation was now tinged with a dark suspicion. What if she wasn't just a parade ground perfectionist? What if her disappearance was connected to the attack? Was she a deserter, or something far worse? He dispatched a team from the military police. Find her, he commanded. Find her now. Back in the communications hub, Anna had managed to establish a fragile, one-way link into the TOC's internal diagnostic network. She couldn't send a message, but she could see the data packets flying through the system. And she could see what the cyber team in the TOC was doing. They were fighting the virus head-on, throwing standard countermeasures and antivirus scripts at it. It was like trying to stop a tank with a water pistol. The virus was simply absorbing their attempts, adapting, and growing stronger, using their own tools against them. She watched the digital slaughter for a moment, a profound sense of frustration washing over her. They were fighting the storm. She knew they needed to find the eye of the hurricane. She changed her focus. She couldn't talk to them, but maybe she could show them. She began to write a simple script, a sniffer program designed to isolate and highlight only one thing: the unique 7-character signature she had seen earlier. It was a needle in a digital haystack, but she knew the needle's exact dimensions. She compiled the script and found a way to inject it into the TOC's diagnostic data stream. It was a massive risk. If the attacker's virus detected her script, it could trace it back to her location in seconds. It was the equivalent of shouting her location in a room full of enemies. But it was the only option she had. In the TOC, Captain Davies was staring at his screen in despair when a new window suddenly opened on his diagnostic display. It was unauthorized, a ghost in his own machine. His first instinct was to kill it. But then he saw what it was doing. It was filtering the chaotic stream of virus code, and out of the gibberish, it was pulling a single, repeating string of characters. The same string he had dismissed as irrelevant noise. The script was highlighting it, making it pulse, demanding attention. What in God's name is that? A technician asked, pointing at the screen. Davies stared, his mind racing. Someone was helping them. Someone was inside the network with them. Someone who clearly knew more than they did. Trace it, he ordered. Find out where that script is coming from. One of his NCOs typed furiously. After a moment, he looked up, his face a mask of confusion. Sir, the signal is originating from inside the base. It's coming from the Sector 3 communications hub. Davies' eyes widened. That building was supposed to be empty. Before he could process the information, a runner burst into the TOC, breathless. Sergeant Major. Captain Davies. The MPs found the missing soldier. They found Specialist Reed. Evans turned, his face like thunder. And the runner swallowed hard. Sir, she's in the Sector 3 comms hub. She's on a terminal. She's the one sending the signal. The room fell silent. All eyes turned from the runner to the screen where the mysterious script was still pulsing, a beacon of insight in a sea of chaos. The countdown clock showed 32 minutes remaining. The revelation hung in the air of the TOC, thick and suffocating. Command Sergeant Major Evans stared at the runner, then at the pulsing code on Captain Davies' screen. The pieces clicked into place with a jarring, unbelievable clarity. The quiet logistics clerk, the general's peculiar interest, the impossibly clean service record, the desertion of her post. And now this, a ghost in their machine, a phantom signal of expertise originating from the one person on the base he would have least suspected. His mind, so used to rigid structures and predictable outcomes, struggled to reconcile the contradictory information. A clerk was not a cyber warfare expert. A soldier who abandons their post is not a savior. Yet the evidence was undeniable. "Get her in here," Evans finally growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Bring her to me. Now." The MPs who had found Anna were just as confused. They had stormed the comms hub expecting to find a deserter, maybe a saboteur. Instead, they found a lone specialist, her face illuminated by the glow of a single monitor, her fingers moving with a blur across the keyboard, completely oblivious to their entry. She had looked up at them with a calm, focused annoyance, as if they were interrupting a delicate surgical procedure. "I need 5 more minutes," she had said, not as a request, but as a statement of fact. Now, she was being escorted across the darkened base, flanked by 2 imposing MPs. She walked with her head held high, her expression unreadable. She wasn't repentant or afraid. She seemed entirely consumed by the problem she had been forced to leave behind. She was brought into the TOC, and the ambient noise of the room immediately died down. The technicians, the officers, the runners, they all stopped and stared at the small, unassuming woman in a standard combat uniform who was now the center of this high-stakes drama. Evans stood in the middle of the room, his arms crossed, his posture radiating pure intimidation. He let the silence stretch, studying her. He was testing her, waiting for a crack in her composure. She met his gaze directly, without fear or defiance. It was the look of a professional waiting for a briefing. "Specialist Reed," Evans began, his voice dripping with menace. "You abandoned your post during a base-wide crisis. You broke into a secure facility. You initiated an unauthorized intrusion into a classified network. Before I have you thrown in the brig for the next 20 years, you're going to tell me exactly what the hell you think you're doing." Anna didn't waste time with apologies or excuses. Her response was as direct and functional as the code she wrote. The signature on the virus payload, the repeating string A7, B4, Z, Yell, it's a marker. It belongs to a programmer known as Azrael. He was the lead architect for Project Chimera. The name fell into the room like a stone. A few of the older technicians shifted uncomfortably. Captain Davies's eyes widened in recognition. Project Chimera was the stuff of legends and nightmares in the cyber warfare community, a defunct, Black Book DARPA program aimed at creating a truly autonomous, self-aware offensive cyber weapon. It was officially denied to have ever existed. "That's classified information, specialist," Davies said, his voice tight. "How do you know that name?" "I was on the red team," Anna replied flatly. "My job was to break everything he built." A wave of disbelief washed over the room. The red team for a program like Chimera would have been composed of the most elite, most brilliant minds the government could find. They were ghosts, digital phantoms whose identities were buried under layers of impenetrable classification. And this woman, this logistics clerk who stocked shelves and filled out forms, was claiming to be one of them. It was insane. Evans let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You were a red teamer? You're a 92A specialist. I've seen your file. You fix trucks and count bullets." "My file is a cover, Sergeant Major," she said, her tone still utterly level. A good one, apparently. Azrael's protocol was to always embed a failsafe in his attack vectors, a backdoor that only he knew. It was a signature of his arrogance. The string isn't just a name. It's the root key for the failsafe. You're fighting the virus. You need to be talking to it. The technical jargon, delivered with such calm authority, was staggering. Davies, a man with a master's degree in network security, was looking at her with a newfound, dawning respect. He understood what she was saying. It was a radical, terrifying idea. "You're saying you want to use the virus's own code to communicate with it? To give it commands?" "Yes," Anna said. "It's the only way. Your countermeasures are making it stronger. You're triggering its adaptive defenses. You need to use the key to get past the firewall and issue a system halt command directly to its core logic." Evans was still skeptical, but the seed of doubt in his own position was growing. The countdown on the screen showed 24 minutes. His way was failing. His experts were stumped. And this impossible woman was offering the only new idea, the only glimmer of hope he had. He had to know for sure. He made a snap decision, a leader's gamble. "All right, Specialist Reed," he said, pointing to a sandboxed, isolated workstation in the corner. "Prove it. You have one chance. You will work on that terminal, and that terminal only. Captain Davies will monitor your every move. If you deviate, if you try anything, the MPs will take you down. Show me what you can do." Anna simply nodded. "I'll need admin privileges." Evans looked at Davies, who hesitated for a heartbeat and then gave a slow, deliberate nod. The fate of the entire base now rested on the preposterous claims of a quiet logistics clerk. As Anna walked towards the terminal, the entire room watched her, a silent audience at the most important event of their lives. She sat down, her back straight, and for the first time, a flicker of her old self, the ghost from Project Chimera, surfaced. Her hands poised over the keyboard. She was no longer out of place. She was home. The workstation was a standard-issue military rig, hardened against electronic eavesdropping, but otherwise unremarkable. To the cyber team watching her, it was just another tool. To Anna, it was an instrument. She took a moment to acclimate, her fingers lightly touching the keys, her eyes closed. She wasn't praying. She was centering herself, pushing away the distractions of the chaotic to see, the skeptical eyes of the sergeant major, the immense pressure of the ticking clock. She was retreating into the cold, clean world of pure logic. When she opened her eyes, they were clear and focused. The entire world had shrunk to the confines of the monitor in front of her. Captain Davies stood directly behind her, his arms crossed, watching every keystroke as it appeared on a mirrored display. The other technicians gathered around, their own work forgotten, their expressions a mixture of intense curiosity and profound skepticism. They were about to witness either a miracle or a complete fraud. Anna began to type. Her movements were a revelation. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. It was a fluid, unbroken stream of commands, appearing on the screen with hypnotic speed. She wasn't using a graphical interface or any of the standard diagnostic tools the other technicians relied on. She was working directly in the command line, a stark black screen with flashing green text. It was a raw, fundamental level of interaction with the machine that few people in the modern world even knew how to access, let alone master. "What language is that?" One of the younger technicians whispered to his NCO. "It looks like a derivative of assembly, but it's backwards. The syntax is inverted." "It's not a language," the NCO breathed, his eyes wide with awe. "It's a direct machine code interface. She's not talking to the operating system. She's talking to the processor." It was the digital equivalent of speaking directly to a person's subconscious mind, bypassing their senses and their conscious thoughts entirely. She was manipulating the foundational logic of the computer itself. First, she built a virtual environment, a digital cage within the sandboxed machine. It was a complex and brilliant piece of on-the-fly coding. She was constructing a perfect replica of the base's core network architecture in miniature, a safe place to lure the virus. Then, with a few dozen keystrokes, she reached out into the infected network, not with an attack, but with a whisper. She sent out a single data packet, a packet that contained nothing but the 7-character string A7, B4, ZL, the Azrael key. For a terrifying moment, the virus in the main network seemed to surge. Alarms on other terminals blared as hostile activity spiked. "She's making it worse," an officer shouted. Evans took a half-step forward, his hand clenching into a fist, ready to give the order to cut her off. "Wait," Captain Davies said, his voice tight, his eyes locked on Anna's screen. "Look." The spike was a feint. It was the virus's defensive reaction, its lashing out at an unrecognized stimulus. But the core of the virus, the intelligent, seeking part of it, had recognized the key. On Anna's monitor, a connection was established. A tiny thread of the massive virus had detached from the main swarm and entered her virtual cage, drawn in by the promise of the key. She had it. A live sample, isolated and trapped. "My God," Davies whispered. "She's got it." Anna ignored them. Her focus was absolute. Now that she had a piece of the live code, she could dissect it. Her fingers became a blur. She broke the code down, layer by layer, peeling it apart like an onion. The polymorphic defenses, the encryption, the logic bombs, she bypassed them all with an elegance and speed that was simply breathtaking. She wasn't hacking the virus. She was disassembling it, reverse engineering its very purpose on the fly. The technicians watching were humbled. This wasn't the clumsy smashing of a door. This was the work of a master locksmith picking an unpickable lock. Each line of her code was a perfect, calculated move in a deadly game of chess. Evans watched, his skepticism slowly, painfully eroding, replaced by a feeling he hadn't experienced in a very long time: awe. He was witnessing a level of skill so far beyond his comprehension that it felt like magic. He had judged this soldier by her rank, by the uniform she wore, and he had been catastrophically wrong. He was not looking at a specialist. He was looking at a weapon. The countdown clock on the wall passed below 15 minutes. The tension in the room was a palpable force. "What is its target?" Evans asked, his voice now devoid of its earlier aggression, replaced by a quiet urgency. Anna didn't look up from her screen. Her voice was a low, steady monotone, a narrator for the destruction she was uncovering. "It's the backup power distribution hub for the underground munitions bunkers. Sector Gamma," she said. "The virus isn't designed to shut it down. It's designed to overload it. It's going to dump the entire base's power grid into that one hub. The breakers will fail, the conduits will melt, and the resulting explosion will detonate the entire Sector Gamma arsenal." The scope of the disaster was beyond imagination. It wouldn't just wipe the base off the map, it would create a crater visible from space. It was a weapon of mass destruction, delivered by a string of code. "Can you stop it?" Evans asked. Anna paused her typing for the first time. She turned her head slightly, her profile illuminated by the green glow of the monitor. "No," she said calmly, "but I can redirect it." The word redirect hung in the tense air of the TOC, heavier than any physical threat. It was a word of immense risk, of untold possibilities for catastrophic failure. Command Sergeant Major Evans processed it, his mind, accustomed to clear-cut military solutions, grappling with the nuance. You didn't redirect a missile, you shot it down. You didn't negotiate with a bomb, you defused it. But this enemy was different. This enemy was an idea, a ghost of pure logic, and Anna was proposing a battle on its terms. As if sensing the question forming on everyone's lips, Anna elaborated, her eyes still fixed on the cascading lines of code. "The virus's core command is absolute. It has one function: to connect to the Sector Gamma hub and execute the overload sequence. It can't be stopped or deleted without triggering a dead man's switch, a failsafe that would likely execute the command immediately. It's a suicide bomber, but its targeting system relies on the base's network pathways. It follows the digital signs. I can't remove the destination, but I can change the signs." Captain Davies understood immediately. "You're going to create a ghost destination, a fake power hub in your virtual environment, and trick the virus into attacking that instead." "Exactly," Anna confirmed. It was a plan of breathtaking audacity. She would have to not only replicate the complex electronic signature of the power hub perfectly, but also sever the virus's connection to the real world at the precise nanosecond it committed to the fake target. If her timing was off by even a fraction of a second, the virus would realize the deception and could default to its primary target. The margin for error was zero. While Anna worked, a grim-faced communications officer handed Evans a secured satellite phone. It had taken them nearly an hour to get one working, bypassing the base's compromised systems. On the other end was the Pentagon. Evans gave a terse, brutally honest summary of the situation: a complete communications blackout, a hostile cyber entity, and a ticking clock pointing towards an extinction-level event on his base. He also told them about Specialist Reed. The name was met with a long, telling silence on the other end of the line. Finally, a stern voice came back. "Sergeant Major, I am not authorized to confirm or deny the existence of any special programs. However, I can tell you that Specialist Reed's file is flagged at the highest level. Your orders are to give her whatever she needs. Do you understand?" "Crystal," Evans replied, his jaw tight. He hung up. The confirmation, as oblique as it was, sealed it. He walked back towards the workstation where Anna was deep in concentration. Her face was pale, beaded with sweat, but her hands were as steady as a surgeon's. The awe he felt was now compounded by a new, profound sense of responsibility. This soldier, this ghost he had dismissed and threatened, was now officially under his protection, and the weight of the world was on her shoulders. He leaned in, his voice low and respectful. "Specialist, what do you need from us?" It was a complete reversal of their dynamic. The skeptical authority was now asking for orders from the quiet professional. Anna's focus remained on her task. "I need you to shut down all outgoing network traffic. A total blackout. Nothing gets out. No pings, no data packets, no automated handshakes. I need the network to be a one-way street, leading only to me. And I need you to do it 5 minutes from now." It was a risky order. A total blackout would also cut off the last of their failing diagnostic tools. They would be completely blind, relying on nothing but faith in her abilities. Evans looked at Davies. The captain nodded grimly. He understood the logic. She had to ensure the virus had no other path to follow, no way to verify its location against the outside world. It had to believe her simulation was its entire reality. "You heard her," Evans commanded the room. "Make it happen." The cyber team scrambled to obey, rerouting firewalls and killing ports. They were no longer the primary actors. They were support staff for the main event. As they worked, Evans pulled up Anna's service record on a still-functioning internal personnel tablet. The file was mostly a wall of black, redacted lines. Classified. Need to know. Eyes only. But a few details had been left, perhaps intentionally. A series of specialized training schools with cryptic acronyms. TDY, temporary duty, assignments to locations that were just grid coordinates in deserts and unnamed mountain ranges. And then he saw it. A single, unredacted decoration. The Distinguished Service Cross. The second highest military award for extreme gallantry and risk of life in actual combat with an armed enemy force. It had been awarded for an operation dated 2 years prior, an operation with no name, no location, just a citation that read, "For extraordinary heroism and tactical brilliance in neutralizing a threat of strategic national importance." This clerk, this unassuming specialist, was a decorated war hero for a battle no one had ever heard of. The irony was staggering. He had stood her on a parade ground and judged her for her posture, while she carried the weight of secrets and actions he could barely imagine. The countdown on the wall hit 10 minutes. The room was silent except for the frantic clicking of keyboards and the low hum of the remaining electronics. Anna was building her trap. Line by line, she constructed a perfect digital replica of the Sector Gamma Power Hub, a masterpiece of illusion. The final pieces were falling into place. The fate of thousands of people now came down to the skill in her hands and the strength of a ghost story she was about to tell a machine. The command was given. Kill the external links. Now. Captain Davies's voice was sharp and clear in the hushed TOC. With a final series of keystrokes, his technicians complied. The last few flickering lights on the network status board turned from green to red. Fort Sheridan was now an island, completely severed from the outside world. The only active conversation was the one Anna was about to have with the virus. The countdown showed 5 minutes. Anna's screen was now split into 2 halves. On the left was the code for her virtual environment, the digital trap. On the right was a direct feed from the isolated piece of the virus she had captured. She was watching its behavior, learning its rhythms, waiting for the perfect moment to act. She was a hunter, studying her prey. "It's getting agitated," she said, her voice a low murmur. "It knows the clock is running down. It's starting its final authentication sequence to confirm the target." The room held its collective breath. This was the point of no return. "I'm opening the path," she announced. With a final command, she created a direct, high-speed channel from the main body of the virus on the base network into her sandboxed environment. She was inviting the wolf into her living room. On the main screens, the technicians could no longer see the virus's activity, but they could feel it. The base's internal power grid, the one thing still partially functioning, began to fluctuate wildly. Lights dimmed and surged. The hum of the electronics rose in pitch, a sound of immense strain. The virus was gathering its strength, marshaling all its resources for the final attack. It was a digital beast coiling to strike. Evans stood behind Anna, his hands clasped behind his back, a statue of forced calm. He had given his trust completely. His role now was to maintain discipline, to ensure no one panicked, no one interfered. He watched the back of her head, the slight, steady tension in her shoulders. She was carrying a weight that would have crushed any other soldier he knew. He felt a surge of protective pride, a feeling a command sergeant major usually reserved for his hardened combat veterans. 2 minutes. Anna's fingers danced over the keyboard in a final, frantic burst of activity. She was reinforcing her trap, adding layers of authentication protocols and fake system responses to make her virtual hub appear irresistible, to make it seem like the path of least resistance. She had to be more real than reality itself. "It sees the path," she whispered. "It's starting to move. The main body is migrating." She had done it. She had convinced the highly advanced, autonomous weapon that a figment of her imagination inside a single computer was its ultimate destination. A bead of sweat dripped from her temple and onto the keyboard, but she didn't notice. Her entire being was focused on that screen. 1 minute. "It's almost fully inside my environment," she said, her voice tight with strain. "It's connecting to the virtual hub. It's verifying the target signature." On the screen, lines of code scrolled past at an impossible speed. It was the virus, talking to her creation, testing its defenses, confirming its identity. And her creation was answering back, perfectly, fluently, lying with the absolute conviction of a machine. 30 seconds. Locking it in, she hissed through gritted teeth, ready to sever. This was the moment. The virus was now fully committed, its entire being focused on the fake target. It was the moment a missile acquires its final lock, just before its rockets fire. She had to cut the connection to the main network now, trapping the virus in her sandbox forever. Her right hand moved to the enter key. Her left hovered over a complex sequence of keys that would execute the sever command. 10 seconds. 9. 8. The lights in the TOC flickered violently. A high-pitched squeal came from the speakers on the wall. The virus was beginning its attack. 7. 6. Anna's eyes were locked on a single progress bar on her screen, the one indicating the virus's connection to her virtual hub. It had to be at 100% before she could cut the cord. 5. 4. It was at 99%. The final data packets were flowing in. 3. 2. 100%. "Now," she yelled, her voice raw, and her hand struck the keyboard. One hand hit enter, confirming the virus's final lock on the fake target. A nanosecond later, her other hand executed the sever command. It was a perfectly timed 1-2 punch. The execution of a flawless plan. For one long, agonizing second, everything got worse. The overload command, meant for the munitions bunker, was unleashed with its full fury inside her computer. The lights in the TOC didn't just flicker, they exploded in a shower of sparks. The speakers shrieked and then went silent with a final, pathetic pop. The workstation in front of Anna glowed with an intense white light, its internal processors melting under a power surge that should not have been possible. Then, silence. A deep, profound, absolute silence. The emergency monitor on the wall, the one with the terrifying red clock, went black. Every screen in the room was dead. The darkness was total. It was over. In the suffocating blackness of the TOC, no one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the frantic, ragged panting of the technician whose console had exploded. Was this victory? Or had they simply failed in a new, more catastrophic way? The silence stretched for an eternity, a void where hope and fear hung in perfect balance. Then, a single light flickered on. A small, green LED on a server rack in the far corner of the room. Another joined it. And another. A ripple of soft, reassuring lights spread through the room as, one by one, the base's systems began to reboot. The primary lights overhead hummed, sputtered, and then flooded the room with a steady, clean fluorescent glow. On the main wall, the monitors blinked to life, displaying not a countdown, but the familiar, beautiful, mundane sight of the Fort Sheridan-based security network booting up its welcome screen. A collective, shuddering sigh of relief went through the room. It was hesitant at first, then grew into a wave of choked, disbelieving laughter and applause. Men and women who had been facing imminent death just moments before now clapped each other on the back, their faces streaked with sweat and tears. They had survived. In the middle of the celebration, Command Sergeant Major Evans looked past the cheering crowd to the corner where Anna had been working. The workstation she had used was a smoking, blackened husk. The screen was shattered, the plastic casing melted and warped. It had absorbed the full, focused fury of the virus, sacrificing itself to save the base. And sitting in the chair in front of it was Specialist Anna Reed. She was slumped back, her head resting against the high back of the chair, her eyes closed. Her face was ashen, her uniform soaked with sweat. The adrenaline, the years of repressed training, the immense concentration, it had all drained away at once, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She looked small and fragile, no longer the digital phantom who had wrestled with demons, but just a tired soldier who had done her duty. The celebration slowly died down as the others followed Evans's gaze. They saw her, the quiet clerk, the architect of their salvation, sitting amidst the wreckage of her battlefield. A path cleared as Evans walked towards her. He stood before her for a moment, looking down at the woman who had defied his every expectation. His face, usually a mask of hard discipline, was filled with a complex mixture of gratitude, wonder, and deep, profound respect. He didn't say a word. Words were inadequate. Instead, he did something that stunned the entire room into silence. Command Sergeant Major Evans, a man known for his rigid adherence to protocol, drew himself up to his full height and rendered a slow, perfect, parade ground salute. It wasn't the casual salute one gives a junior enlisted soldier. It was the salute of a warrior acknowledging a peer. It was a gesture of earned respect, offered in full view of his command, a public admission of his own flawed judgment and her incredible valor. Anna's eyes fluttered open. She saw the sergeant major standing there, his hand held high in a gesture of ultimate respect. She was too tired to stand, too drained to return it. She simply met his gaze and gave a slow, slight nod of acknowledgement. It was enough. The silent communication between two professionals, two soldiers, was complete. Just then, the doors to the TSE burst open and a flurry of high-ranking officers rushed in, led by a familiar, imposing figure. It was General Morrison, the four-star who had paused in front of her during the drill. His face was grim, but his eyes were sharp and knowing. He took in the scene at a glance: the rebooting systems, the relieved technicians, the smoking terminal, and the command sergeant major saluting a seated specialist. A faint, knowing smile touched his lips. He walked directly to Anna, ignoring everyone else. He stood over her, his shadow falling across her. "I was told I might find you here," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We had a deal, Reed. You do your 3 years in the quiet life, and we leave you alone." Seems the quiet life didn't stick. Anna looked up at the general, the man who had been her ultimate commander in a forgotten war. "Trouble finds me, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The general nodded. "It always does, for people like you." He looked around the room, then back down at her. "Your cover is blown, specialist. Your work here will be classified by sunrise. But these people, they'll never look at you the same way again. Your time as a ghost is over." He extended a hand to her. "It's time to come in from the cold. We have a new project, and its architect just tried to blow up a good portion of Georgia." A spark of the old fire returned to Anna's eyes. Azrael, her nemesis, the man she was trained to defeat. Her work wasn't over. She took the general's hand, and he helped her to her feet. As she walked out of the TOC, leaning slightly on the general's arm, the soldiers she passed parted ways for her, their faces filled with an awe that she would never get used to. She was no longer invisible. She was Specialist Anna Reed, the quiet professional who had saved them all, a hidden hero brought, at last, into the light.